Hi, it's Will from StormTheCastle.com, and this is a tutorial on how to forge a knife, how to blacksmith a knife, and how to actually do it on the forge and the anvil. And this is the knife that I make in this tutorial. It's a pretty wicked knife, about 11 inches long, and I take you through the whole process, everything from the very beginning to the very end, polishing it and grinding and sharpening it. So, and it's a two-part tutorial. And this is part one. I also have another knife making tutorial where I make this knife here. And this is a simpler knife to make. This is about 9 inches long. And I do this with the cutoff, with the stock removal method. So you don't actually, if you want to make a knife and you don't have a forge, you can follow that tutorial, and I'll put the link here in the video, where you can make a knife like this strictly with various hand tools. And so let me tell you a little bit about this knife. I got a little bit. This is an easier, much easier knife to make. This one I did a couple of things that are a little more complicated, a little bit more advanced, but you can still do it as a beginner. Like for instance, I did shape all of this on the anvil, and I will show you that. And it's of course a larger knife. This is a one-piece handle. This one has a two-piece handle, a bolster and a handle, which is a little bit different. The bolster is kind of nice. That's a ebony, a little piece of ebony wood. And instead of using wood dowels to pin the handle, I used a brass rod, so it gives it a different look. So that's a very common knife making technique. So what you're going to need to do something like this is some steel, and I used 01 steel, similar to this, 1/8 inch thick. And I used some brass rod that I picked up at a hardware store. I used two different sizes, 1/8 and 1/4. 1/8 is for the bolster and 1/4 is for the handle. You just cut pieces off of that. And I used some wood. I used, let me think. I used ebony for the bolster, and I can't remember what I used for the handle. It was either mahogany or cocobola. But you see, you get yourself some pieces of wood for the handle. And you can use, if you don't want to use brass, you can use wood dowel, just like I did in the original knife tutorial. That's just wooden dowel to pin it. So this is a tutorial on how to forge or blacksmith a knife, where you actually use the forge and the anvil to create the knife. Okay, you start out with, of course, some drawings you should make so you understand how your knife is going to look. And I'm using some 01 steel. There's a couple of challenges with this knife. That's this section right here between the blade and the handle, and of course the curve of the knife. And I'll show you how I handle these. So let's start up the fire, the forge, and get our steel in there. I'm not going to heat up the whole knife. I only do it in sections, about half and half. Work on the blade, work on the handle, work on the blade, work on the handle. Almost getting to the temperature, starting to get nice and hot. See it? See that red color? Needs a little more. So once it gets up to temperature, we start hammering it like this. Now, on the side, when you're working on it on the side like that, that is called upsetting the metal. And what that'll cause, it'll cause thicknesses around the edge of the work. So you have to always be sure you hammer that back down as you're working it, and you'll see this as you start to work it. But I just got a little bit there. See it? So most of the work for this, because of the curves in the knife, is done on the horn of the anvil like this. And I'm not going to bring out that point yet. I'm only going to keep it rather thick. You don't want to work the fine areas like the point right away. You want to save them towards the last. So now something like this, I'm going to do a half-face hammer blow here. See this? This is an important part of this for this particular knife, and I will show you. That's the place where the blade comes out. I believe that's called the choil, where the blade comes out compared to the handle. And I'll show you a graphic right here. See this part right there, the choil. So how do we get that? We do that with that half-face striking. You lean it over the anvil like this, and you strike it here. It will cause the handle to get smaller, but the blade won't. There we go. It's starting to take a little bit of shape. Continue to work it. You're upsetting the metal, so always be sure to hammer that back out. And there's two curves. There's the curve for the blade, and then there's the opposite curve for the handle, which is interesting, but we keep working that. Another technique, of course, is as you're spreading out that metal, you might have some extra, so I just using a chisel here to hot cut that. And it's starting to take shape, see it? Now I can start to think about working out the point towards the very end of this whole process. Define that point. Of course, always flatten it out like this. As you're upsetting the metal, it's going to get thicker around the edges of the knife. So you want to flatten that all out to make sure the blade stays uniformly thick. And that's an ongoing process as you're working it. So now we're going to start putting in the bevel on the blade. We're using glancing blows here to make it thinner at the blade's edge and thicker at the spine of the knife. And you do this on both sides. It takes practice and work, but you'll start to hammer out that thinness for the bevel. And you can use various tools like this swage block to even make a nice swage block specifically for making bevels on blades. Kind of nice. I don't have one, but it's nice to have. So now here's another technique called packing the blade here. And you use a cross peen hammer, and you actually strike at the bevel, the edge, where the cutting edge is, and that compounds the molecules and makes them tighter for a better edge. And you should do the same amount of strikes on each side of the knife to keep it even. So one more technique here I wanted to show you is, as I'm working towards the end of the project, I often like to switch to a smaller hammer. Gives me the opportunity to get a little bit more detail out of it. So now let's anneal this blade. That will take all the stress out of it and soften it up so you can grind it or sand it or file it. Put it in the fire, get it up to Curie temperature where a magnet no longer sticks to it. It'll be red orange. And then cool it slowly. And what I did is I put it in sand to let it cool slowly. So now we can work on it. So you get some tools and clean it all up and do any final shaping of the blade. You know, belt sander, grinder, files, emery paper. And that's about it. So you can see there the blade is just about done. So now we can move on in part 2 to drilling the holes, putting the handle, polishing and sharpening the blade. And that will be coming soon. Lots more stuff. I got that other blacksmithing, a knife tutorial. Lots more stuff on my website at stormthecastle.com. And I have 2 tutorials here. The easy knife making where you don't need a forge. And I also have a tutorial on how to make a forge, a backyard forge. You can improvise one up. Thanks for watching.